Good.
We are we going? We're Team 4. We're doing a classic battleship game, 5 ships on a 10 by 10 grid. Each player tries to guess the location of his opponent's ships.
So we're going to start off with our main class that we created from last week's assignment. The two variables that we created were a string of a first name for the player's name and a string description. And when that description's called, it'll show this is the battleship game and for the player to enjoy it.
All right, and then right below that we have our main class, and you can see here in the main class we actually have several other classes that are being called, and so they're all packaged together, and we can call many different classes that we've created. So here in the first one, you actually see we actually create an instance of the main file, so the CIT 260 Team 4 Battleship, and we call that instance game. And so just like with that. That's how we call instances of our classes. So, with the ships, it's ship, and scoreboard, it's scoreboard. And then you can see also within each class, there's also some functions that are called. So you can see the name of our instance, and then it's calling that function for that instance. And so you do that just by typing in the instance, and then period, and then the name of the function, and it'll call that function.
And then the functions that we have for this class, our first function is getName. The first thing we have in that function is the scanner input. Since we're going to be asking the player for their name, the scanner input allows the keyboard connection for them to type in their name. So first it'll display what is your name when you start the program, and then the player will be able to input their name.
The next one that we have is display help. And this is where we take their name that they entered and welcome them to the battleship game by printing the string welcome and then adding the name that we've collected.
That takes us to our second class that we created, which was the gameplay class. Like Jordan said, we create an instance of the gameplay class, and to start out the gameplay class, we create a few strings, some integers, and a float. We create a return output, a player turn output, a column. We create a float for the row float. This is to qualify for the requirement for the typecast. We have a float rather than an integer. We have the aircraft carrier, which we have auto-programmed as in spot A, and the integer line for the column is 1. And then the patrol boat, we have it located at C4, and then we have just an integer X, which is we use as a counter later on in this function, in this class.
Okay, next we have the hit or miss, our hit or miss boolean. First we have the scanner input, so the user can input. Here it's enter the columns, they can enter the column. Next we do the row for the system output, enter the row. And then we have the row float, it's being turned back into an integer to satisfy the typecast requirement.
And here's where we, these conditional statements here test the boundaries of the function. The first one here compares the user's column input that was obtained above, and it compares it against the 10 possible column values because it's a 10 by 10 grid. And you can see our logical operators here. So if column equals A or the two pipes there, and then it'll go through all of them, comparing them all. And then so long as it satisfies at least one of those, it'll move on to the next conditional. And this is comparing the row variable. The row was an integer above. So it'll compare that number, and it'll use these greater than or equal to 10 or, excuse me, less than or equal to 10 and greater than or equal to 1, so it has to be between the numbers 1 and 10. And again, so long as it satisfies that, it'll move on to the next line, which is another if statement, and that's if the column variable equals a predetermined aircraft carrier variable, which we've determined above, and it equals the aircraft row, then it'll return the output here. The return output variable is assigned this little phrase, hit aircraft carrier. And then down below on line 43, we have just a do loop here that this actually just keeps track of when the player hits a ship. It'll add 1 to the variable x, so they'll get a score, right? And then as the loop continues through on line 47, we have the x plus there, the increment. So it starts out 1 and it'll increment each time the loop runs. So that's a mathematical function there, or operator. And then so it's greater than, or excuse me, less than or equal to 5. So because there's 5 spaces in the aircraft carrier, it'll stop after 5.
All right, and that takes us to the last part of our gameplay class, which starts out with an else if statement. So if the computer bypasses the inputs and they are not true for any of the previous if or do statements, it'll next go to the else if statement and compares it to the patrol boat parameters, which in this case, the patrol boat column is going to equal C, and the row will equal 4. So if you type in C4 as your input, it will return hit dash patrol boat exclamation point. After that, if that is true, it will execute the do statement, which does the exact same thing as the aircraft statement above. It will output player's 1 score is X, which in this case starts off as 1, which is referenced back up in the top of or right above the public boolean. And it starts off with 1, and then the while counts that all the way up to 2, because the patrol boat only has 2 spaces to be hit. After that, if none of that is correct, what Matt has gone over and I have gone over, it will go to the next else statement, and it will return the output miss. And if you typed in something that was completely wrong and not on the grid at all, it will return invalid input for the last else statement of this if-else statement and all the embedded if statements within there. After that, the very last thing we have is the escape sequences. And after that, our program is done.